There have been many incredible 2D platformers in the last decade. Metroid Dread, Hollow Knight, Cuphead, and even Little Nightmares, to name a few. These games are, without a doubt, some of the most lauded and spellbinding titles of the genre. Yet, there's one 2D game that has been widely considered a masterpiece, and that game is Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Developed in 2020 by Moon Studios, a Vienna-based gaming company, Ori and Will of the Wisps is a bewitching, breathtaking game with groundbreaking visuals, a heart-throbbing narrative, and simply sensational combat. The Will of the Wisps is the second game of the Ori series, and just like its predecessor, it was critically well received with 9 out of 10 scores on IGN and a 10 out of 10 on Steam. It was so well received, in fact, that it won the Game of the Year in the Xbox Games Award in 2020, and it did this despite facing some pretty stiff competition. Is Ori and Will of the Wisps still worth playing in 2023, or has it passed its prime? Find out in today's review. Okay, we'll kick things off with the story and narrative. Despite being a 2D platformer, Ori has one of the most compelling stories known to gaming. Ori's story is a little complicated, so don't expect me to go into the nitty-gritty here. If you really want to understand everything about it, then I suggest you play the first game, Ori and the Blind Forest. The good news is the first game is just as awesome as the sequel. The events of the second game pick up immediately after the first one. Ori and his adopted family Naru and Gumo had just welcomed a new member into their fray, a baby owl named Ku. Unfortunately, Ku was born with a birth defect and rendered him unable to fly, but Gumo built him a wing contraption that solved that problem. Ori and Ku take to the air, but are then separated during a storm which brings them to Niuin, the game's version of New Jersey. Ori manages to find Ku in a gloomy place known as the Silent Woods, which probably should have been called Silent Hill because the whole region is basically an owl graveyard. Tragedy strikes, however, as Ku is killed by Shriek, a monstrous, disfigured owl that looks like something straight out of Tim Burton movie. It's now up to Ori to gather the 5 wisps and Spirit Willow's light, restore the Spirit Willow, and save the forest as well as Ku. Ori and the Will of the Wisps looks like a Disney or Pixar animated movie, but don't let its cutesy exterior fool you. It deals with very heavy subjects such as death, disability, empathy, and the like. Its narrative is chock full of more tear-jerking plot points than The Last of Us 2. I remember feeling so much relief when Ori finally found Ku, only for the game to pull the rug from under me and then sucker punch me with Ku's tragic death. Ultimately, the story is intense, well thought out, and very cathartic. Truly one of the best parts of this game. Okay, let's talk about the gameplay. Ori and the Will of the Wisps play similarly to most 2D Metroidvania games like Hollow Knight, Metroid Dread, and so on. You jump, glide, and zap through intricate levels sprawling with traps, puzzles, and enemy AI. When you're not platforming or spiking weird woodland creatures in the face, you're busy solving puzzles, backtracking, and collecting some of the game's many collectibles. These collectibles include energy cells, Orlick ores, and spirit shards to upgrade various facets of Ori's abilities. The game's map is also littered with optional missions known as spirit trials and combat shrines. Combat shrines puts you against wave after wave of enemies, which you have to survive to receive a reward, while spirit trials is a multiplayer segment of the game which tasks you with racing against the ghosts of other players in an attempt to beat their record. Ori's gameplay is swift and enjoyable. There's something truly satisfying about zipping and zapping through the game's deadly terrain like a pro. That is, until you run into the giant sandworm at the wind-torn ruins. Then the game suddenly turns into a playthrough of Cat Mario. Be that as it may, I profusely enjoyed the gameplay, especially its hard-hitting combat. Speaking of which, let's talk about the combat. The game's combat does not pull any punches. It suckers you in with a few slugs and spine slimes to boost your confidence, and then wallops you with a boss fight against a freakish demon wolf thingy. Unlike the first game, the Will of the Wisps has a great ensemble of boss fights that force you to master the game. These bosses include a huge monster beetle, a giant frog that looks suspiciously like Jabba the Hutt, and a monster owl on stilts. Luckily, the game helps you out by giving you a handful of awesome combat upgrades. Spike, Spirit Smash, and Blaze are personal favorites of mine, yet I found myself using the other combat abilities as well, especially during the boss fights. In the end, the game's combat may not be as exhilarating as, say, Hollow Knight. Nonetheless, it still succeeds in delivering an exciting experience that will have you reeling for days. Okay, let's talk about graphics and performance. What can I say about Ori's graphics that hasn't been said already? The game's surreal world isn't just a work of art, it's a masterpiece. From the dark and dreary silent woods to the cold and frigid plains of Bar's Reach, every location on the map is breathtaking. The background is so vivid and multidimensional that simply calling it a 2D game would be a massive understatement. That said, Ori has also been plagued with a few bugs and glitches, especially frame rate drops. Thankfully, I didn't experience too many of these during my gameplay. Obviously, they must have had some patch updates since 2020. All right, next is replayability. Okay, so this game has a low level of replayability, being a largely single-player game. Besides the spirit trials and combat shrines, there isn't much else to do when the main quest is complete. However, ramping up the difficulty for another playthrough is always a great idea. Be careful though, the game is already pretty difficult as it is, so try your best not to smash your Xbox controller to smithereens. Now let's talk about the spirit of this game. At the start of the 3D gaming era, many gamers, yours truly included, had thought this would be the final nail in the coffin for the 2D gaming genre. Most feared that we had seen the last of mind-blowing platformers like Castlevania and Super Mario Bros. Yet, fast forward to the current generation of video game consoles and 2D games like Ori and the Will of the Wisps have shown us that the death of the genre has been greatly exaggerated. The game pays homage to several Disney animated shows, most especially Lion King. Despite wearing its cartoony influence on its sleeves, it does not shy away from dealing with heavy and often dark topics. Ultimately, Moon Studios set out to create a great game that blazes the trail for other games in the genre, and that's also fun to play. Needless to say, they knocked it out of the park. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is an incredibly fun joyride with a captivating story to boot. Its visuals are stunning, its music spellbinding, and its characters unforgettable. It's a great game that both kids and adults can get into, therefore, I'll be giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. Do you agree or disagree with my review? Let me know what you think in the comments. We make awesome videos like this every week, so be sure to like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell to get regular updates on new videos. Thanks for watching this one, you guys. We'll catch you in the next one.